Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this week's first edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight, he's been hailed for the sterling work he has done as he took on some of the country's biggest and most powerful companies. 18 years with the Competition Commission, including 9 as its head. Thembinkosi Bonagele reflects on his legacy as he prepares to bow out.
New from the box, you could even hear when he speaks that here speaks a young, vibrant intelligentsia.
Meet Julius Malema's new protege. Newly elected EFF Student Command leader Sihle Lonzi will be my second guest. Those 2 interviews make up tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. In the 9 years he has been at the helm of the Competition Commission, Thembinkosi Bonagele has taken on some of the country's big guns many thought were untouchable. Your Coca-Colas, your AB InBevs, your Glencores, Old Mutuals, Mondis, the banks, to name a few. To quote the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition, his work to strengthen the Commission's capacity in cartel and merger investigations has resulted in more competitive markets, substantial number of jobs retained, development programs for small and medium businesses, and greater levels of investments. Thembinkosi Bonagele, welcome to The Watchdog.
Thank you for having me.
It's been 9 years at the helm. It's been rough at times. The people you took on, pushing back, hitting back at you. How would you describe the 9 years that you've been at the helm of the Competition Commission?
It's been an exciting time. It's been challenging, and that's precisely what makes it probably one of the jobs one could have had in a lifetime. I actually don't know if there is anything better I can do than this. It was exciting, enjoyable, intellectually challenging, but also the sense that you were engaged in something that was meaningful for society, that can bring about real change. So yes, you're right, at times challenging, but what is life without a challenge and contradictions?
Which moments or episodes kind of stand out?
Well, probably it's not much celebrated, but there is a judgment by former Chief Justice Mogoeng on access to health care, a constitutional court judgment where Mediclinic was trying to acquire a small hospital group, Matlosana. We took this case ourselves from beginning to end throughout the court processes. It was a shining example of the Competition Commission's young, bright minds taking up a case and winning at the highest court in the land. We also had the price reduction in the mobile market, where we did a market inquiry and found that both MTN and Vodacom were engaged in what we call excessive pricing. We told them that we were bringing a prosecution unless they drop prices by between 30 and 50%, and they did.
What about the Mediclinic case? Is particularly important. Why do you feel that perhaps it hasn't been celebrated? What was important about it?
For the first time, we had a judgment that told us and everybody else that when we interpret the competition statute, we must interpret it in a manner that gives meaning to the constitutional right of access to health care. And for the longest time, people saw competition law as running parallel to the Constitution. And that court was quite emphatic that the constitutional values, the normative framework, must permeate all things we do in interpreting what might seem like a technical statute, we must be alive to this. And this is the point we were making in that case, and we prevailed. So when now you are dealing with a complaint, whether it is about pricing of healthcare products or things like access to healthcare facilities and products, you have to take into account the fact that people have a right to healthcare. It might be provided by the state, which is the primary mode of provision, but the private sector also plays a role in providing this service. And when you interpret the statute about competition, you must remember that even in the private sector, these provisions are relevant.
Notwithstanding what you did, with regard to your Vodacoms and your MTNs, people still feel that it's not competitive. That space is not competitive. I mean, you will recall during the conversations, around the spectrum and so on, and what they're being required to do. But people still feel that that space is anti-competitive. The prices remain high for what the cell phone companies are offering.
Remember, this is a licensed industry, so you kind of get a structure that you inherit. So we've licensed telecoms companies, and our licensing regime gave us these two dominant players and a few small others. So you've got to deal with the market you have, and I think that it is right that the prices have taken so long in South Africa to come down, and part of this, we have said, has to do with the fact that we don't have competition. We have dominant players who are clear market leaders who are dominant, can dictate the price, and the consumers can't really switch to alternatives. But also there has been the issue of spectrum. South Africa is probably one of the last countries of its size not to release spectrum. I mean, even in the African continent, we are behind many countries with less capacity than us in releasing spectrum and taking advantage of this infrastructure of delivering these services at more affordable costs. So we've just had the auctioning of spectrum now, and that should bring about, and it's very important that we all watch that this actually happens, that should bring about a further reduction in prices for data.
Where do you think lies the problem, though?
As I've indicated, the first is that you just have an oligopoly there. You have two dominant firms. The other two competitors, Telkom and Cell C, are not really effective competitors against these two. So you have a duopoly in the country, and that's the reality. And
what do you think of the? I mean, there've been reports that MTN wants to buy Telkom.
I better not comment on that. Good luck to them.
It will be interesting to, know what you think. The construction industry has been, another area, of our economy that, I mean, you have ruled against them. Do you think that corruption is more endemic there than in perhaps other sectors of our economy?
Certainly at the time, we found that construction operated in this manner, operated as cartels. We didn't believe this actually. This started like as a complaint from Treasury that the cost of building stadia were much higher than previously anticipated. And when we looked, we found evidence, and the more we looked, the evidence started piling up on virtually every project we looked at. projects by the state and some of the projects by the public sector. I mean, your freeway your highway project in Gauteng, Gautrain, building of dams. Virtually every project you can think about was the victim of this cartel. And it revealed to us that there was something much more fundamental about culture of doing things. Look, even today, you find that when you have these large construction tenders, there are still funny things where people will prescribe a product that must be used, to a point of prescribing a brand. So it's very clear that there is collusion not just between the firms themselves, but sometimes between the firms and the officials inside who are issuing tenders. So we find big projects, somebody is wanting to fence prisons, says this is the type of fence that we want, and they name a brand. So it's very clear that sectors like this, whether you go to materials for constructing, specialized material for constructing dams, specialized cement for that, grouting, things like mining equipment, the stuff that's used for roof bolts or things like that. So in this kind of, if I say construction, I include engineering. There is a lot that I think has been wrong there in the past, and unfortunately some of this conduct seems to be continuing in some instances. Remember, these services are procured at all levels of government. They are procured at national government, provincial government, but especially at local government as well. A lot of infrastructure development takes place there, and a lot of things happen at that level.
The banking industry, I mean, you've ruled against at least 17 banks in the past. How would you describe that industry?
It's been quite an interesting journey with banking. I mean, that case has still not been heard on the merits because banks have been resisting even pleading their case. And I think that, this is a sector that's not used to being held accountable. It's like this idea of holding corporate power accountable, because remember, in some of these cases, these companies have pleaded guilty in the United States. And the biggest cartel in the United States involved the South African rand and US dollar pair. In that case, most of them, some of them at least, have pleaded guilty in the US on. So you can see this idea of a developing country authority seeking to hold banks, American banks in particular, accountable. He has got some difficulty, and I think that we have shown there because we're probably the only developing country that has done this. I know Brazil has also tried, but this has been the biggest case in the developing world. In a case that has been a clear-cut case in the US, the UK has also had its own prosecution, and so has been the EU. So it's one of those cases that shows the pedigree of South African enforcers, because the resistance that you see is a demonstration of our resolve to hold them accountable, no matter how long it takes and no matter what resources it may take.
What makes South African banks, or the banking industry in South Africa, sort of particularly difficult to hold to account?
Well, it's a very powerful industry, very powerful sector, but also regulators traditionally have been quite conservative in their approach to financial services. So this idea of systemic risk and so on. So the issues of stability have tended to dominate the approach of regulators and policymakers. And I think we have demonstrated in the past that you can be reasonable in your approach, but expect people to comply with the law. We're not asking people to do anything more than just being equal before the law. We've also demonstrated that you can protect consumers. I mean, some years back we did an inquiry into banking charges, and most people couldn't even imagine that you can question the price that the bank imposes. Banks used to impose, they still do, but the amounts were exorbitant then. If you fail to make a payment to a creditor through your stop order, they essentially punish you. And when you ask the banks, I mean, in this relationship, where do you fit? Where does that revenue go to? So those type of questions, it's just the system, people just never got used to this idea that you could be held accountable, you could be asked these questions. You are a bank, but are you a government now that you are going to punish non-payers? Even the state can prosecute you for failing to pay your debts. Mm-hmm. But the banks could impose a penalty to you for this. And I think it's this, then you see that this idea that they almost stand at this position where they enforce the rules in the financial environment and transactions.
Why are they feared, though? I mean, over the weekend at the ANC policy conference, the issue of a state bank came up again. And in large part, they want the state bank to do what your banks, cannot do. Why are they feared? Why are banks feared? I remember, when COVID started, the president would have these meetings with business leaders. The banks were disproportionately represented. Virtually every CEO of a bank was part of those meetings. Yet in other industries or sectors, you didn't have that. You had the business organizations representing people.
Remember that the financial services are quite important in South Africa, and their importance actually has grown with the financialization of the economy. You've had a decline in manufacturing. I think it's sitting at about 13% now, down from something like 25, 24%. But the financial sector is kind of emerged as this powerful institution or institutions for our GDP, for the functioning of our economy. Our banks are well respected globally. Our financial markets are deep. But I'm saying that has come at the expense of other sectors. So manufacturing being a good example of this. The issue about the state bank and South African banks, I've always said, if the banks were doing what they were supposed to do, there would be no need for a state bank. If we had more money funding SMMEs, because we know that there is low levels of participation in South Africa by black people, by SMMEs, and it's banks that must finance this sector. And so all of these issues that are coming up about banks and even the Reserve Bank, at the heart of it, if you think about it, is really the contribution that they make in transforming the South African economy, in actually not just transforming it in racial terms, but just infusing dynamism, just infusing innovation, just infusing that participation that would enable it to grow and absorb more and more people.
But also, it's things like you can easily, get a bank to finance a car, million rand car, easily, which you're going to pay over 4 or 5 years. But when you look at how difficult it is to get them to finance a house, over the same period with similar sort of conditions, that doesn't happen.
Especially funding businesses, which is what we need the most. We need people, we need more risk taken. We need people to back entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs that they don't know, because black people have not been funded in this country before as a result of apartheid. So they don't know these people. But we're saying that they must take more risk and they must diversify the people that they fund. So I absolutely agree with you. It's such a, it's like funding consumption, right? More than, this is what we've been saying, that we, if you look at new emerging sectors such as digital markets, you have people there who are taking high risk but very fascinating ideas, interesting ideas that, by the way, represent the future of the economy. The future of the economy is in digital markets. But who is playing in digital markets? People with deep pockets, or angles at least with deep pockets. So a whole section of the population can never participate in that sector because you don't have venture capitalists who can back them up. You just don't have enough in the financial sector that can support the emergence of this entrepreneurial class.
You have, of course, in the past also received a lot of criticism, the Burger King case being one that you overreached and made bad calls.
Well, I'm not sure about that. It certainly was a debate, and I think it was good to educate people. You see, by law, and a lot of people don't know this, competition authorities can block a transaction because it's leading to a reduction in BEE. Just that can be sufficient grounds to block a transaction. And this is precisely what happened in Burger King. So the uproar was because people didn't understand the law, that this is a possibility. And therefore the controversy gave us an opportunity to explain what the legal test is in this case. The case was resolved, by the way, in the end on appeal, because Burger King agreed to sell a meat plant to a BEE player, and agreed to have an ESOP where they brought in workers as part of the shareholders. And as far as I'm concerned, that controversy was resolved in a very positive way, positive for us as a regulator, but also I've met with the parties, both sides, Grand Parade and the acquirer. They're both happy.
What would you say are your areas of concern, in other words, where there's still a lot of anti-competitive behavior? Which areas of the economy are you worried about currently?
Unfortunately, it's quite a few. It's quite a few, because we have a very concentrated economy. In fact, we did a study last year, which we presented to Cabinet and some committees of Parliament. Clearly, we have a big problem with agriculture. Agriculture is highly concentrated. So if you are needing inputs in agriculture, whether it is fertilizer, seeds, genes for animal farming, often it's a duopoly of two. If you are lucky, 3 players you can go to. So you actually cannot do farming. And we're seeing also a lot of the black participants in farming earn a very small share of revenues from agriculture. So for an emerging economy, especially with ambitions of land justice, the current model where people, even if they get land, they just cannot have access to markets, or they need inputs from dominant players. Take, for example, if you want to enter dairy, if you know, you have to be a big farmer because your processor is very large. They literally dictate the price at which you must sell your milk. So you are squeezed both sides. You're squeezed by the guy who supplies you with animal feed because they are dominant. You are squeezed by the guy who buys your product. And this you see replicated in almost all of these agricultural sectors. The other one is digital markets. The economy has shifted from the traditional bricks and mortar store that you and I are used to. The bulk of the economy is shifting into the digital world. And this is almost invisible to regulators. What are the implications on this for competition? Not just competition, for privacy, for tax, for SMMEs. So I feel that this is a whole area where we need a focused approach because most of the economy approach, regulation to the economy, is still regulating an old economy. And that's the shift that's needed.
In fact, that was my next question, that are our policymakers and regulators alive to the dynamics of each, of our economic sectors, so that they're able to intervene wisely, but also proactively, perhaps? You're quite right that the economy is a little bit ahead of the curve. So the decision makers in the economy, that is the private sector, is a little ahead of the curve. So we are catching up in a way. The transformation of markets by digital platforms is quite huge. So if you look at more advanced economies where you've had companies such as the Amazon coming in, they've seen a huge transformation on how people buy products. And that has necessitated that regulators look at these things, look at them differently. The European policymakers have passed a special law for the so-called gatekeeper firms. So we are a little behind the curve. This doesn't mean that we are not grappling with these. I mean, the Commission is currently running a market inquiry into online intermediaries. So people who deliver food services, your kind of booking services, booking.com, all of these that have almost become a gatekeeper. If you are running a B&B, you all know you have to register and be part of Airbnb. What does that mean for competition? What if they refuse you from, what about the terms of entry? What about the conditions for different sizes of businesses? If you're running a restaurant, you're a small restaurant, and you are competing with big restaurants, how are the terms skewed against you? All of those questions are quite important. Well, you have some platforms that are not based here. What is the approach on taxing them? Because how you tax them have a bearing on competition. All of these things are questions that are coming up in the market inquiry we are running. But how do other jurisdictions, the Europeans you've just mentioned, for example, what do policymakers and regulators in those jurisdictions do, that which we are not or we may not be doing, to stay ahead, I must correct myself if I caused confusion. All regulators and policymakers are behind the private sector. The private sector has been ahead. I mean, the European Union, to their credit, they have done a lot of catching up. The United States is still running a very archaic competition statute. Every now and then you see senators debating what to do with GAFA firms, so Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so on. But you never hear that there is a resolution, so there is an acknowledgement that there's a problem.
So I think that with the transformation of the modern economy, just the recognition that you are going to be behind the curve means that you have to be constantly sensing where things are going. So it's not a bad thing in itself to be behind, but it's about what you do when you realize that there is a big and fundamental shift.
What would you say that office, the Competition Commission, needs right now to build upon what all of you have been doing over the years?
Well, you have to be resilient and stay the course. Some of the challenges you face, litigation and so on, you just need this strength to pursue what you believe is right, but also, you know, a very clear vision on what you achieve. I made it a sort of a theme of my term that I was interested in inclusive market, in opening up markets. And so it's not just a question of resources. Resources are important, but it's about what do you want to achieve? What do you want to do with the resources? And I think that, you know, this is what is needed, not just at the Commission, but in so many other public institutions.
Where to?
I don't know. Garden leave.
Well, best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming through, Competition Commissioner Thembinkosi Bonagele. After the break, we introduce you to Julius Malema's new protege.
The newly elected president of the Student Command knew from the box, you could even hear when he speaks, that here speaks a young, vibrant intelligentsia. Because he started us by referring us to 1929. I was worried, when are we going to arrive at 2024 if we started 1929. Let me also congratulate all those who are elected with him. You are entrusted with a huge responsibility of not only leading the students, but also of leading the young people of South Africa, because you are the only youth voice in South Africa.
Sihle, welcome to the Watchdog.
Thank you very much, and thank you to your viewers at home.
Well, your president, very proud of you, gave you your marching orders, also, I mean, during that speech. But let's start here. Who is Sihle?
Yeah, no, Sihle is a boy from a township in Cape Town, Gugulethu, who was, through a combination of hard work, taking school serious, and also luck, because we cannot fall for the sentiment which seeks to say that hard work alone in a capitalist society can give you opportunities. So through luck and a combination of hard work and perhaps the prayers of close family members, I was able to then get a scholarship for high school, and then after that, university. So that is very briefly the journey of Sihle.
Where are you studying now?
Now I'm studying at the University of Cape Town, doing my final year in economics and philosophy.
And what attracted you to the EFF?
No, I think what attracted me is what attracts many young people to the EFF. I think the youth of South Africa is tired of the rainbow nation lie, is tired of the many promises and false commitments which were made by the former liberation movement, which is the African National Congress. The youth of this country is saying political freedom without economic freedom alone is not enough. In fact, it's meaningless. To go and buy and vote, but you can't buy bread, really means that the democracy doesn't speak to the material needs and conditions of our people. So that is a story which inspires and attracts many young people in South Africa to an organization like the EFF.
What do you mean by Rainbow Nation lies?
Well, the idea that post-94, there is some type of integration which has seen black people being integrated into, the political and economic life of South Africa. I think Biko speaks very well about this type of integration when he speaks about white liberals. He says that we don't want to arrive at an already prepared table. In fact, we want to form part of the decision-making as to what forms, what constitutes the table, where do we put the spoons. So it's a co-option of the majority, but we're not meaningfully, contributing, particularly at an economic front and the economic direction of South Africa.
Why? What are the reasons for that situation?
Well,
it's
the reason to say that political power alone, one of the biggest problems of the former liberation movement, the ANC, was to look at political power as an end in itself. But in fact, political power must be a means to an end. So political power must be the vehicle that you use to ensure that there is bread on top of the table, to ensure that majority of the youth are going to school, to ensure that there is free education, to ensure that the unemployment rate is low. So it is that inability to look beyond the glory that comes with political office. So the African National Congress is simply excited by being in political office, but they don't see political power as a vehicle to change the lives of our people.
You don't think the former liberation movement is now alive to that, hence they're talking about radical economic transformation and so on?
No, but the ANC has been speaking about these things since, from GEAR to RDP, now to NDP. So the ANC is an organization of policy documents. So they write, they speak about all these developmental things, but they don't implement any of them. They don't see them to their fullest. The other thing about the ANC is that it has an inability to see a program to its end. I think it's even reflected in terms of service delivery. You build a road here, you don't finish it, and then you want to jump onto the other one. So even their most reactionary policy documents, they are unable to see them to the end because they don't have that political will, they don't have that political muscle and maturity.
How do you see an EFF government changing that?
It's precisely because in the EFF, political power must be a means to an end. So the EFF is inspired by, of course, you will know, Vladimir Lenin in Russia. So Lenin understood that you must capture the state in a progressive way and use it towards revolutionary objectives. So you don't simply arrive at parliament and be comfortable, but you must be able to see parliament as a means to give land back to the people. You must be able to see union building as a means to give economic power and freedom to the people. So an EFF government then begins from that position to say that we don't view the state as an end in itself, but rather we view the state as a means to revolutionary gains so that we can change the lives of our people.
Do you think that's what happened to the ANC? In other words, ANC MPs got to parliament and then became comfortable?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't really speak for them much, but what I can say is that they've failed the people of South Africa. They've failed the youth.
Was it for lack of trying, or was it because they are, as you said, comfortable?
I think, Frantz Fanon really speaks about this in Pitfalls of National Consciousness, how former liberation movements, when they're engaged in struggle, fail to think about the day when they finally, get their political power. So the ANC really is following the trajectory of many other liberation movements in Africa, movements that were not able to see governing beyond the struggle itself. So it's an organization stuck in the past. That's why when they want to come and manipulate our people, they constantly want to remind us about Mandela and this, and they fought for us. I mean, the Minister of Police, was asked a very basic question, and then he starts going on a rant about he fought for this country, he went to Robben Island. Yes, we know they did all of that, but they must have a futuristic view on how they're going to grow South Africa's economy and take out majority of the youth of this country that is currently drowning in drug and alcohol abuse.
Do you aspire to be a career politician yourself?
No, I think that's the definite difference between people who are engaged in activism in the EFF and other political parties. We don't see politics as a career. We don't see it as a means to have glory or popularity or be a celebrity. In fact, it's a position of responsibility. If you were listening to my closing address at the Assembly, part of the central message I informed the delegates was that we don't have time to celebrate because there are over 7.5 million young people who are economically inactive. In other words, they are not even trying to seek jobs. So there can't be any career. There's no career there. It must be service. It's a position of responsibility. If anything, it must be quite nerve-wracking for anyone who takes it up if they know what they're taking up for.
Would you take a political deployment, so to speak, if your organization wants you?
No, I mean, I would. The youth of this country is not in political deployments. The youth of South Africa is on the ground. The youth of South Africa is in the universities. So I don't see why a young person would want to take a deployment of any kind. Again, those are sensibilities of the Congress movement. A student leader, a student activist must be on the ground. They must be in our communities. They must not be fascinated by the glory that comes with political deployment. So the answer is I would want to persuade them against it. Yeah.
And talk us through what is on your to-do list.
So one of the most important resolutions that our assembly, not conference, sorry, passed was that for one to be a member of the EFF Students' Command, they must first be a registered voter, but they must also be a member of the EFF. So the delegates are inspired by the Black consciousness generation, the generation of Nkhuputsitiro. If you know about the Teflop testimony, Nkhuputsitiro doesn't just problematize the campus dynamics, or rather the campus politics, because he has an understanding that the campus environment is directly influenced by the socio-political environment of the country at the time. So the EFF Students' Command this time around is inspired by that type of thinking, to say that many of the problems we're experiencing at a campus level are directly influenced by those who are in positions of power. So you can't speak accommodation if you don't speak land. You can't speak free education if you don't speak economic freedom. So that's one point which came out of the assembly. So you'll be seeing the Student Command a lot more in communities. You'll be seeing the Student Command a lot more in high schools, trying to mobilize. There are about 2.5 million, I think, between the ages 16 to 18. So they can potentially register to vote, but they're not registered to vote. So those are the things that we'll start to look at. Every Friday, the EFF Students' Command will be running a voter registration. There are more than 17 million people who are not registered to vote in South Africa. So again, we see political power, we see the elections as a means to achieving our aims. To avoid an unled revolution, I think it's something that our Commander-in-Chief always emphasizes, to say that the economic depression of South Africa is so dire that if there is no vanguard movement to lead those frustrations, the people are going to want to revolt themselves. And really, South Africa is in that ticking time bomb.
But aren't you going to stretch yourselves? Because as I listened to your CIC saying that, going to go to high schools, youths, the townships and everywhere, I mean, how do you take on so much?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very historic exercise. I mean, we would not be the first ones who do it. You will know that in the 80s, in fact, I think CIC speaks to this in his address, COSAS had to take on and become the youth voice and not limit itself only to high schools. I mean, the 1976 generation that we constantly, talk about all the time on June 16, understood that their struggle was not only based at the high school level, but they had to stretch themselves beyond that, go to communities. The generation of Black consciousness, Steve Biko, many community programs, which were designed to not only conscientize, but also meet the immediate needs of our people. So it's not a new concept. It's more of a back to basics type of an understanding. So the EFF Students' Command is going to become that voice because nature doesn't allow a vacuum. And there is no youth voice in South Africa ever since the Congress movement expelled the generation of economic freedom in our lifetime. So the Student Command must begin to take that stand. It must begin to close that gap.
In as far as, student issues are concerned, what for you should be priorities?
Look, the call of the Student Command is simple and it's always been consistent that we want free education for all in South Africa. But of course, as we pursue the struggle for free education, there are immediate material gains that we must be able to achieve. For example, we have the Sizofuna Ngenkani campaign at the beginning of every year to ensure that students are registering, they are not being asked money. We want to make sanitary towels free and in all public spaces, particularly institutions of higher learning. Issues of accommodation, issues of infrastructure at TVET colleges. The government of the ANC does not even understand the importance of a TVET college, because if you look at many emerging economies and developed nations, the TVET sector as a skill driver was central to economic development. So those are some of the immediate things that we'll be fighting for. So we're going to have many campaigns, many marches, not only to government, but also to spaces of industry. It is our view that institutions like the JSE, for example, must have a role to play. South Africa has abnormal levels of liquidity. I think the World Bank also makes this analysis. In other words, the wealthy in South Africa and big corporations are keeping a lot of liquid assets or liquid cash as opposed to investing and industrializing the nation. You will remember in Thabo Mbeki's tenure, there was economic growth, but there were no jobs. They came back and termed it jobless growth. So it speaks to that, to say that all of these industries, we're going to be taking them on. We're going to be taking on SETA. SETA has a responsibility to play. We're going to be looking at all the companies who take money from SETA under the impression that they're going to develop skills or amongst young people, internships and apprenticeships. And if that money is not being used properly, those companies are not going to function. We're going to close them down, we're going to shut them down, we're going to close their operations until they stop the corruption and deliver to the youth of South Africa.
Okay, let's see what people are saying on social media. People who are watching this program. Slaughternet D says the newly elected EFF-SC president is ready for the task. Liaka, after listening to him on Saturday, I'm convinced that he's the right man to lead our young people, and the future of my children is in the right hands. Chris Ani has multiplied. The Young Lion speaks hope for the youth. The EFF-SC will become the voice. There's no freedom without the land and free education. Wish you all the best. I'm a product of your good work. Constitutional Court on school uniform. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think generally the young people of South Africa and the people of South Africa are ready for a government of the EFF. That is why we have the very difficult task of ensuring that the youth is converted and the youth is active electorally in politics. So that is the task that we have. We have never doubted that the youth of South Africa, the people of South Africa, want an EFF government. You know, we always speak about how we're winning SRC elections across all institutions of higher learning and TVET sector itself. But now we must begin to convert. For example, it cannot be that, you know, some of these wards are won with 1,000 votes, but you'll find an SRC president of the EFF Students Command getting 4,000, 5,000 votes. So the EFF Students Command must introspect and say, how does an SRC president get 5,000 or 4,000 votes, but there's a local VD near campus and we lost and maybe an ASC councillor won with 1,000 votes. So that is the task that we're going to begin to do, because we are of the view that we will never be able to fully liberate the African child outside of economic freedom. So the electoral victory of the EFF becomes extremely paramount to the program of action of the EFF Students Command.
Who do you, at a personal level, draw your inspiration from?
I draw my inspiration from that whole generation. Of course, the generation is led by Commander-in-Chief Julius Malema, Deputy President Floyd Shivambu. So that is the generation of economic freedom in our lifetime. We have the view that it's not, they lead the generation, not necessarily an organization, because it started back then, but because the ANC had long sold out, expelled them, and they were able to build a new vehicle. So the young people of South Africa, not just myself, I heard you make comments of protege. I'm not a protege. I think there can only be one Julius Malema in South Africa. But of course, the youth of this country is inspired by that generation of economic freedom in our lifetime.
Outside of the EFF, who inspires or inspired you, dead or alive?
Of course, my mother and grandmother. I think it's the reality of most youth, young people, particularly black people in South Africa, who are raised by single parents, who are raised by their grandmothers. So that is where we get the, you know, my grandmother used to hate people throwing away papers whether it's a newspaper, whether it's a random, thing written on, because she was of the view that if it had words, you must read it. So we got that culture of reading from a young age. She was a domestic worker. She used to work, for white people who used to throw away these comic books. And she would go to the bin and collect them, bring them at home, dust them, clean them. Some of them would be extremely smelly, but would be forced to read them because she wanted to spark that culture. So yeah, it's those two black women who really formed and guided upbringing.
Any philosophy you live by, swear by?
Yeah, I mean, economically, I'm a heterodox economist. But of course, we want to push socialism. We want to push a just society, an equal society without classes, without any discrimination, whether by race, gender, class, or sexuality. So we're inspired by those ideals, and we're inspired by the ideals of Marx in as far as his critique of the capitalist political economy. We're inspired by the ideals of Lenin because he gives us a concept of state power. He critiques it, but he also tells us how revolutionaries should perform in a bourgeois parliamentary democracy. And of course, Fanon then comes in because both of these individuals exist within the European context. But Fanon says race must also be centered and central to the discussion of the oppressed people of South Africa. We're not just black because we're poor, but we're also poor because we're black. So those are the many thinkers that inspire not only me, but my peers and my generation in the EFF Students' Command.
Once again, congratulations and best of luck.
Thank you very much.
That, of course, is the Student Command President, Sihle Lonzi of the EFF. That's our program for tonight. To join us again tomorrow night, same time. Have a good night.